I think I was asked here because I'm not a chief, I'm just an Indian. I was just one of these hippies who bought international times. I never met the Beatles, I never had dinner with Lord Goodman or any of that stuff. I was almost the age of the year, 1964, I was 413, 1965, I'm 14, 1967, I'm 60. So I'm an ordinary kid, working class kid in Scotland, but I was part of this underground, and it's actually a nascent underground. Before the underground's name, there's this nascent underground. I think I'll try and prove that the roots of the underground are Scottish, that Scottish people invented it and were central to it. Without Scottish people, there wouldn't be any of the underground. So, Faz Lane, Holy Loch, CND, I was about 12 or something like that. And I see a CND marching up Union Street in Aberdeen, so I joined it. And then I started going to things. Now, when I'm saying me, it's me I'm talking about because I only know my experience. But I am not claiming any sort of precociousness or specialness. There's hundreds and thousands of people in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in Cardiff, in Hull, all over Britain. The poetry scene, again, there was a circuit of poetry clubs. So people were hitchhiking all over the place, making connections. And the important thing I think about the poetry scene was it was performative. It wasn't a poetry scene of people writing books and somebody take the book home and sit reading it. It was a poetry scene of clubs, pubs, where people would turn up reading the poetry and performing poetry and making it accessible and again making it fun. There was a big boom in the art world, art business, art interest, probably about 1963. With the pop art, essentially. Essentially say New York pop art hit the world, and it was in colour magazines, early itself, or Sunday Times magazine, because it was fresh, it was graphic, it looked exciting. And what I think probably got to stress is the really important books were, a few books took on very significant importance. Particularly, I'm thinking of Tennyson Hudson, 3 books by Tennyson Hudson. There's Hans Richter's Dada book, Patrick Wahlberg's Surrealism book, and Lucy Lippard's Pop Art book. But then something happened that changed everything. It brought all these things together in a different way, and that thing was the acid. I genuinely believe that the acid completely and utterly changed everything. The very idea of the acid itself is like a utopian driver. As in the Middle Ages, the idea of a new Jerusalem, of the end of the world turned upside down, the end of the established order, Christ coming back walking the earth, that was a driver for a utopian vision. Just as in the 19th century, the idea of communism, even though it didn't have to exist, it didn't deliver, the very idea became a social driver for social change. I think the acids did exactly the same thing. The promise of acid, the promise of being at one with the divine, of multiplying the human sensorium, of bringing forward a new world, living in a new world, became such a revolutionary thing that changed and brought together all these various strands in a new something. Don't want to call it a movement, don't want to call it a new something that happened and evolved into something else.
And I thought I had a pretty good idea of the 60s, when I was teenage, kind of 14, getting into punk in 76. I'd go into Oxfam and I'd pick up my tonic suit, and when you still could pick up really old good 60s clothes for next to nothing. And while I was at it, I'd buy a copy of Play Power or Bomb Culture or whatever else. So I was very familiar again with this kind of dominant story, which is very much associated with Hoppy, who we've got here, and Barry Miles as a kind of official historian of the counterculture. And I have no problems with any of that or what they've got to say. but the story they tell is their story. And when I started researching my mother's life, probably about 7 years ago, quite seriously, I realised it was a whole other story of other people. So I, on the one hand, was quite surprised because I discovered I didn't grow up with my mother. I didn't know a huge amount about her. She died in 1979. But I discovered that I knew people and had known people for quite a long time. I'd known my mother in the 60s. And I discovered she knew people I was very interested in, but who wouldn't necessarily be well known outside quite small circles. My mother's address book, and I went through the address book, and there was very gaudy in there, which really excited me because I love old Motown. It turns out that a girlfriend of my mother's had been very Gaudy's girlfriend for a while, so there was no particularly big connection there. And Maurice Rhodes of the Olympic Press was in there, William Burroughs, Alex Trockey. It turned out there was a big connection with Alex Trockey. She was involved with a lot of drug dealing with Trockey. Also Mick Jagger, Chris Jagger, John Lennon, Cat Stevens. Find someone in the phone book. I kind of use a mixture of techniques to find people. You try on addresses from my mother's address book. Some of them would still work. You could trace people otherwise. And so I might phone someone up. One person I phoned up, a woman called Jane Ripley, who'd been the girlfriend of Graham Plimpton, who I'll get on to a bit later, in the early 60s, in mid-early 60s when she'd been at school. He was later a big dope dealer. I phoned her up and said, you don't know me, but you knew my mother, Julia Cowan Thompson. And she says, oh, Llewellyn, I've been waiting for you to call. I knew you'd call me sometime. So, I wasn't phoning people up and saying I'm a journalist. I was phoning up and saying I want to talk to you about my mother. I think if I phoned up and said I'm a journalist or a historian, they'd have told me where to go.
To put it bluntly. Since its discovery in 1938, and much more later, LSD has polarised opinion into two basic factions. Those who think it's the work of the devil, set to destroy the minds of anyone foolish enough to take it, and those who think it's a cosmic gift to humanity, a tool for personal and planetary transformation.
It was announced in the press that the title of my message this evening was LSD. To those of an older generation, LSD stood for pounds, shillings, and pence. But to modern youth, LSD is the name of a dangerous, death-inflicting, and damning drug. The world, of course, has gone crazy.
The commercial offers the hippies view of LSD and goes something like this.
Now if your time or if it's on down, can take a gas free off the ground. Maybe you'll try a little bit of LSD. Only if you want to shake your hand, it'll blow your brain. Make you act just a bit insane. Give your psychic energy and eat flowers and kiss babies. LSD.
Basically, LSD changed lives and lifestyles permanently. The insights gained from LSD's revelatory aspects even led many people to give up psychedelics altogether and to take up established religious traditions, both Eastern and Western. The perceptual shift offered by LSD was largely responsible for the explosion in the 60s and 70s of alternative lifestyles, subjects that we take for granted today, such as vegetarianism, organic foods, yoga, and other body therapies, and almost every kind of New Age practice you can think of, were all stimulated or initiated by the massive quantities of LSD which were being swallowed weekly by the youth of the Western world in the 1960s.